The message sent before Wren Calloway's brain caught up with her thumb. I would let that Lycan King ruin me for exactly 1 week and call it the best decision of my life. She stared at the screen, at the small blue bubble sitting smug and irreversible beneath a contact she had saved 8 months ago as a joke. Do not text. RD. Not the group chat. Not Dana, who was supposed to be the recipient of every reckless thought Wren allowed herself on the one night of the year she let herself fall apart a little. Not the safe, deniable audience of a best friend who would have screamed with laughter and demanded every detail. She had texted Rhys Draecon, king of the Ashmore Lycans, the most powerful, most feared, most photographed man in the entire territory. A man she had met exactly once, across a treaty table 6 months ago, and had not stopped thinking about since. No, she whispered to her empty apartment. No, no, no. She hit delete. The app cheerfully informed her that message deletion did not work on messages already delivered. She hadn't known that. She knew it now in the specific, sickening way a person learns something 1/2 second too late for it to matter. Her phone buzzed. Not a reply. A read receipt. Then 3 small dots appeared and vanished, appeared and vanished, as if a man built like a mountain were choosing his words with unusual care. She set the phone face down on the counter like it had bitten her and had just started composing a frantic retraction. That was not meant for you. Please forget you ever saw that. When someone knocked. Not the buzzer downstairs. Her actual door. 3rd floor. She checked the time on the microwave with the specific dread of a woman doing math she didn't want to do. 14 minutes and 40 seconds since she'd hit send. She opened the door already knowing, in the pit of her stomach, exactly who would be standing there, and the sight of him still stole the air clean out of her lungs. Chapter 1. He filled the doorway the way certain men fill a room without trying, not because he'd angled his shoulders through it, but because there was simply more of him than most frames were built to hold. Nearly 6.5 feet of him, dark suit jacket gone somewhere, white shirt sleeves rolled to muscled forearms, the top button undone at his throat, as though even his own collar had failed to contain him tonight. Black hair, one narrow streak of silver above his left temple, eyes the pale gray of a winter sky, until they found her, and gold bled through the gray like a struck match. "Ms. Calloway," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be obeyed. "I received your message." Wren's face went instantly, catastrophically hot. "I noticed the red receipt." "You have my private number saved under an alias that suggests you didn't intend to use it." "I didn't. It was for my friend." I fumbled the contact. She dragged a hand through her hair, mortified past the point of dignity. "You didn't have to come. I was going to send a follow-up, a retraction." A retraction. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, too controlled for that, but close enough to be worse. "I've negotiated treaties with less interesting phrasing than what you sent me, Ms. Calloway. Please, stop repeating it back to me." I found it memorable. His gaze moved over her, flushed, barefoot, an ancient college hoodie, wine still faintly on her breath, and something in his jaw tightened, deliberate, restrained. When he spoke again, all the teasing had gone out of his voice, replaced by something quieter and more careful. "You've been drinking." "A little." "More than a little, I think." He didn't move to come inside. He stood exactly where he was, hands loose at his sides, as though the threshold itself were a line he had already decided not to cross. "Whatever you meant by that message, I have no intention of collecting on an offer made by a woman who isn't entirely herself tonight." Wren blinked. Of every version of this humiliation she'd rehearsed in the elevator of her own mind on the walk to the door, the king refusing her on principle had not been one of them. That's surprisingly decent for a man who apparently drove across the city at midnight. "I didn't drive." Something flickered behind his eyes, amused now, in a different and more dangerous way. I ran. You ran. 15 minutes on foot, Miss Calloway, in dress shoes, because a message came through a line reserved for treaty emergencies, and 3 of my most senior guards read it before I did. A muscle in his jaw ticked, the first genuinely human thing she'd seen him do. So before you finish being embarrassed on your own behalf, understand that you are not the only person tonight who has lost a measure of dignity over this. She laughed, a startled, helpless sound that cracked the tension in the hallway clean in half. This is officially the worst night of my professional life. It isn't over yet. His voice dropped, and something warm moved beneath the words that didn't match the reputation at all. You invited me while you were drinking. Tomorrow, when you are completely sober, I will ask you again whether you meant it. Until then, I intend to say goodnight from exactly where I am standing. That's very controlled, for a man they say once ended a border war by staring an alpha into submission without raising his voice. I've had considerable practice at restraint for the last 6 months, he said, and there was something underneath that admission, something almost rueful, that made her pulse do something reckless. Drink water, sleep. Council convenes at 10. I'll see you there, Ms. Calloway. He turned and walked back down the hallway with the unhurried economy of a man who had never once needed to rush toward anything, because everything eventually came to him. Wren shut the door, slid down against it until she was sitting on her own hallway floor, and pressed both hands over her burning face. 15 minutes, she said, to no one. On foot. She didn't tell herself that night the whole truth of why she'd been 3 glasses past sensible in the first place, that it was the anniversary of her mother's death, the day every year she let the ache surface instead of burying it under work, and that some reckless, grieving part of her had wanted, for one evening, to feel wanted by someone larger than her own quiet grief. She didn't examine either why the name that had surfaced from that ache had been his. She had corrected his solicitor's Latin across a treaty table 6 months earlier. Say that again, in the original. And something about the way he'd looked at her afterward, gold flickering once through gray, had lodged itself somewhere she'd been too careful, until tonight, to admit. The human Lycan Accord office occupied the 11th floor of a glass tower most humans assumed housed an unremarkable law firm. Wren had worked there 3 years, translating not language. The Lycan courts spoke perfect modern English when they chose to, but law, the old formal phrasing of century-dead treaties into something a contemporary council could parse without a historian on retainer. She was good at it. She was, by her supervisor's private estimate, one of the 3 best interpreters of pre-accord Lycan legal Latin currently working in the territory. Now she walked into the 11th floor conference room at 9:58, exhausted and over-caffeinated, and found Rhys already seated at the head of the table, Iseult, his sharp-eyed second-in-command, at his right hand, 2 councilmen across from him. He glanced up. His eyes held hers 1 beat too long to be professional. "Miss Calloway, you look well rested. You look like a man who owes me his silence about last night," she murmured, passing him for her chair, and had the singular satisfaction of watching his mouth twitch before he schooled it flat. The meeting had barely begun, before an older man with silver hair and a wine-dark signet ring set down his folder with deliberate care. Councilman Dorian Vale. "Your Grace," Vale said smoothly, "before the Treasury item, I'd like to revisit succession. The Ashgrave dynasty has renewed their proposal. Lyric Ashgrave is prepared to finalize the match this season, which the treaty language obligates in any case, given the border's continued instability." Something in the room went very still. Rhys's hands, loose on the table, fingers long and controlled, stopped moving entirely. "You keep describing that language as an obligation, Dorian. I've asked twice to see the clause in full." "I'll have my office forward it again, Your Grace. In the meantime, I only ask the Council weigh the treaty's requirements against the cost of delay." "Noted," Rhys said, in a tone that closed the subject like a door slamming. Wren watched Vale's gaze slide, brief and deliberate, toward her before he looked away, and understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, that it had not been idle curiosity at all. When the meeting broke, Rhys found her in the corridor outside the elevator, out of earshot of the departing councilman. "You're steady this morning," he said quietly. Not quite a question. "Mostly. Thank you for last night." She glanced up at him and found none of the councilman's careful neutrality left in his face, just quiet, focused attention, entirely on her. "You didn't have to be that decent about it." "I wanted to be," he said simply. "I'm not going to ask you anything in a hallway outside a council meeting, but I'd like to have dinner with you tonight, when there's no wine and no audience and no version of you that isn't entirely certain of what she's saying. That's a very careful way of asking me something enormous. I've found careful works better on you than blunt does." The corner of his mouth curved. "Though, for what it's worth, I have no interest in 7 days, Miss Calloway. Whatever you decide tonight, understand that going in." The elevator arrived before she could find an answer for that, and she stepped inside on legs slightly less steady than she'd like to admit, watching the doors close on his low, knowing, almost smile. She did not yet know that Vale had, in fact, retained a photographer for exactly this purpose, and that somewhere across the city, a long lens had already caught Rhys Draecon leaving her building the night before, jacket over one shoulder, at 12:14 in the morning. The photograph surfaced by that evening, grainy but unmistakable, captioned across 3 supernatural gossip forums. Who is she? King Draecon spotted leaving apartment of unknown woman, hours before the Ashgrave alliance is expected to finalize. Dana called before Wren had even finished reading the caption twice. "Explain," her best friend said without preamble, "why the actual Lycan King is currently trending on every forum I follow, leaving your building at midnight." Wren closed her eyes. "It's a very long story." "I have wine." "Well, you might want to skip the wine tonight, given recent events. I have tea. Start talking." Wren told her everything. The message, the doorway, the 15 minutes on foot, his refusal to take advantage of her, and heard Dana go uncharacteristically quiet on the other end. "Wren," she said finally, "a photographer doesn't just happen to be camped outside your building at midnight on a random Tuesday. Someone knew he might come." Wren's stomach turned cold. She thought of Dorian Vale's glance across the conference table that morning, deliberate and unhurried, and understood with sudden clarity that whoever had taken that photograph had not been standing on that street by accident at all. Chapter 2. The private rooftop restaurant occupied the top floor of a building Rhys apparently owned outright. The city spread out gold and glittering below, the evening air still warm enough to sit without a coat. Wren arrived precisely on time, sober, steady, and entirely too aware of her own heartbeat, and found him already at the rail with his back to the door, sleeves rolled, jacket discarded over a chair, as though giving her the choice of whether to announce herself at all. "You came," he said without turning. "You asked properly. Apparently that matters to me now." He turned then, and the look on his face, unguarded, entirely focused on her, made her breath catch. "It should. I intend to keep asking properly for as long as it takes." For a while, dinner was almost easy. Sharp conversation, dry humor at Vale's expense, a story about a delegation of merfolk that had gone catastrophically, hilariously wrong during his second year on the throne. She'd forgotten, somewhere between the fear of the crown and the weight of his reputation, that he could be genuinely, disarmingly funny. "Your guards," she said eventually, unable to resist, "actually read the message before you did." "All 3 of them. My head of security informed me, with a completely straight face, that the phrasing was, I believe her exact word was evocative." His mouth twitched. "I have not yet decided whether to promote her for candor or reassign her for insubordination." "I am never going to recover from this." "You'll recover," he said low, "the moment you stop finding it embarrassing and start finding it accurate." He set down his glass, and the humor in his face gave way to something steadier. "You're sober tonight." "Completely." "Then I'd like to ask you the thing I refused to ask while you weren't." His voice dropped, quiet enough that it seemed to vibrate somewhere beneath her sternum. "Did you mean it, Wren? Any part of it?" She could have deflected. She'd rehearsed exactly how she'd deflect on the walk over. Instead, sober, steady, and looking directly at him, she said, "Some of it." Something shifted behind his eyes, gold threading briefly through the gray. "A week." His mouth curved, not quite a smile, something more dangerous than that. "Is that truly all you believed I would want from you?" It seemed like a safe number, reckless enough to be honest, short enough not to mean anything. It meant considerably more than you intended, and considerably less than I'd have accepted. He leaned forward, close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating off him, could smell cedar and rain, and something beneath it that was unmistakably, entirely him. "I've watched you correct my own solicitor's Latin without flinching, challenge Dorian Vale without raising your voice, and hold an entire negotiating table's attention without once performing for it. 6 months, Wren. I have wanted you for 6 months, and you offered me 7 days, as though that were the largest thing you thought a king could reasonably want." Her hand, without her quite deciding to move it, found the stem of her glass, gripping it for something to hold. "You say things like that very calmly for a man half the council is afraid of." "I've had 6 months of practice saying them only inside my own head." His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth and back up, giving her, deliberately, every chance to look away first. She didn't. He told her, then, about the silver streak, the attack 9 years ago that had killed his brother and put the crown on his head 3 decades early, the scar he rarely spoke of and never explained to anyone at that table. He told her without performance, without asking for sympathy, simply because she'd asked and he'd decided, somewhere in the last week, that she was someone he wanted to tell the truth to. It was at that moment that a man from a neighboring table, young, well-dressed, clearly emboldened by wine and proximity to a king he apparently hadn't recognized, leaned across the low divider and set his hand, too familiar, on Wren's bare forearm. "Forgive the interruption," he said smoothly, eyes sliding over her with an appreciation she hadn't invited. "You're the interpreter from the photographs, aren't you? I have to say, I understand the fuss now, though I imagine His Grace won't hold your interest long once the Ashgrave match is settled. Perhaps I could walk you home tonight, in case he's otherwise occupied by then." The temperature at the table dropped by several degrees. Rhys did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He went very, very still. The particular stillness Wren had learned meant something entirely different from calm, and when he spoke, his tone was quiet enough that only the 3 of them heard it. "Remove your hand," he said, "from what is not yours to touch." The man's hand withdrew as though burned. Whatever color existed in his face drained rapidly toward none. "Your Grace, I didn't realize." "You didn't look," Rhys said, gold fully overtaking the gray now, banked but unmistakable, which is a different failure entirely. "I'd advise you to finish your evening at a different table." The man fled without further comment. Wren watched him go, then turned back to find Rhys visibly reining something in, jaw tight, hands deliberately flat on the table rather than curled into fists. "You're jealous," she said, half delighted despite herself. "I am," he said without a shred of shame. "You may choose to speak with, dine with, or leave with any man you wish. That doesn't require me to enjoy watching one of them assume he already has a claim on a night that isn't his." That's shockingly honest. "I've found honesty works better on you than restraint does." He reached across the small distance between them and stopped, his hand hovering just short of her jaw. "May I?" "You're asking permission to touch my face." "I'll ask every time it matters," he said, low. "Wanting you doesn't make the answer mine to decide." She turned her cheek fractionally into his hand instead of answering, and felt him go still again. A different stillness now, the kind that came from wanting something badly enough that even breathing required effort. "I was sober tonight when I decided to come here anyway," she said quietly. "I was sober when I admitted some of that message was true. Stop being careful, Rhys." His hand slid from her jaw to cup the back of her neck, unhurried, and he closed the last of the distance between them himself. The kiss began slow, almost reverent, at odds with every terrifying story she'd heard about him, and deepened only when her fingers curled into the front of his shirt and pulled him closer. She felt the low, involuntary sound that broke in his chest against her mouth, felt his control fray at the very edges, even as his hand stayed careful, deliberate, cradling rather than claiming. When he finally drew back, his forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing like they'd run some distance together. "That," he said, voice wrecked, "took 6 months and considerably more restraint than I knew I possessed. Worth the wait?" "You offered me 7 days," he murmured against her mouth. "I intend to make this considerably harder to walk away from than that." Her phone buzzed against the table, breaking the spell. An automated alert from an archive database flag she'd set weeks earlier on files she'd cross-referenced for the Ashgrave clause. She frowned, pulling back to check it, and felt Rhys watching her expression shift from soft to sharp. "What is it?" "Someone just accessed the 1911 treaty file, the one Vale keeps citing for the Ashgrave obligation." She was already pulling up her notes. "I've had a discrepancy nagging at me for days. I think I can prove it tonight, if we go now." Rhys's jaw tightened, gold banking back toward gray as something colder replaced the desire in his eyes. "Then we go together." The archived original, laid beside the copy Vale's office had circulated, took Wren less than 20 minutes to confirm. "Here," she said, sliding both documents beneath the desk lamp. "This is the true original, from the Accord Office's independent archive, never digitized, never touched by Vale's staff. Read this line. The Ashgrave line and the Ashmore throne may seal the Northern Accord through a union of blood." "May," she said. "An option. Either house could accept the marriage or refuse it without violating the treaty. Now read the copy Vale's office circulated to this council and to the Ashgrave family 6 months ago. The Ashgrave line and the Ashmore throne shall seal the Northern Accord through a union of blood." "One word," Rhys said quietly, staring at the 2 documents. "May to shall." One word turned a political option into a legal command. That's the entire basis for the pressure Vale has placed on both houses for the last 6 months. And I don't think the forged clause is the only thing he's been hiding. She pulled up a second window, her fingers quick over the keyboard. The archive metadata shows the digital copy in general circulation was replaced 8 months ago, right around when Vale's office started pushing the marriage. Access logs from that replacement traced to a terminal registered to his staff. "Show me. There's more." She pulled a third file. A payment record, routed through a shell account, but the timing lines up exactly with the night that photographer was outside my building. "And this." She turned the screen toward him fully. "A letter sent from Vale's office to Lyric Ashgrave's family, describing the marriage as legally mandatory under treaty. The delivery record confirms their counsel received it. He's been lying to both houses, not just pressuring you, manufacturing an obligation that never existed, and telling the Ashgraves the same lie." Rhys was silent for a long moment, something cold and furious moving behind his eyes. "He's been governing my choices with a forged word. 9 years on this throne, and I never once questioned a clause my own solicitors should have caught. You didn't catch it because you trusted the people meant to protect the treaty. That's not a failure, Rhys. That's exactly what he counted on. You just handed me back my own reign," he said, low, looking at her with something that went far past desire. "In one evening." "I've already copied everything to 3 independent servers," she said. "He can't make it disappear now." His phone buzzed against the desk. Iseult, flagging an unscheduled override attempt on the archive floor's outer security. Rhys's expression shifted instantly, all warmth gone, replaced by something lethal and focused. "Someone knows we're here." His phone buzzed again. Isolt's voice came through the speaker, clipped and urgent. "Manual override at the security junction 2 floors below. Someone is cutting the archive off from the rest of the building." Every instinct written across Rhys's face said he would not leave Wren alone. "Go," she said, lifting the encrypted drive. "The copies are already out. I'll lock the inner door and secure the original." His golden gaze fixed on her. 40 seconds. If I'm not back by then, trigger the alarm and get behind the inner shelves. "Rhys, 40 seconds, Wren." His hand closed around the back of her neck for one brief, fierce moment, his forehead touching hers. Then he was gone, moving fast enough to stir the loose papers across the desk. The inner lock engaged behind him. 38 seconds later, the corridor lights flickered once and went out. Chapter 3. The archive room's outer door didn't open. It was forced. A shriek of metal and a shudder through the frame that told Wren, in the half-second before it gave, exactly how much force was on the other side of it. She moved before she'd finished deciding to. Years of Accord office safety drills she'd never expected to need took over faster than fear could. She shoved the heavy reading table sideways to block the direct line to the desk, snatched the physical original treaty and the drive holding her evidence, and shoved both into the wall safe behind the shelving, and hit the emergency alert on her phone with her thumb before the door finished collapsing inward. The man who came through wasn't Vale. Younger, broad, moving with the loose-limbed control of a Lycan, who'd shifted recently enough that his human shape still felt borrowed. "Ms. Calloway," he said, "Councilman Vale would like everything you've cataloged tonight, all copies, and your silence about what's in them." "They're already filed with 3 independent archives," Wren said, backing along the wall of shelving, putting distance and obstacles between them. "Taking anything from this room accomplishes nothing." "It accomplishes a great deal, if you're not alive to say which archives." He lunged. His fingers closed around her wrist, hard enough to make pain flash up her arm, but Wren twisted with the movement instead of fighting against it. She tore herself free, stumbled into the next row, and dragged a stack of bound ledgers down between them. Rhys crossed what should have been an impossible distance in under 2 seconds. Wolf fully surfaced beneath the human shape, eyes gone entirely molten gold, and the sound that tore out of his chest was not one Wren had known a human throat could produce. The intruder was against the far wall, Rhys's forearm braced hard across his throat, before she'd finished processing that Rhys had moved at all. "Touch her again," Rhys said, voice dropped into something barely human. "And I will make certain it's the last thing your hands ever do." "Rhys." Wren's own voice shook, but she made it carry. "He's not worth killing. He's worth questioning. Vale sent him. Kill him here, and we lose the only witness who can put this on Vale directly, in front of the whole council." For one suspended, terrible moment, she wasn't certain the wolf occupying most of Rhys Draecon's expression was listening at all. Then, slowly, visibly, she watched him claw his way back from the edge of it, watched the gold recede by degrees, watched his jaw unclench, watched him choose, deliberately, to lower the man to the floor instead of through it. "Isolt," he said, not taking his eyes off Wren, voice still rough, restraints. "I want a full confession before sunrise." Only once his people had the intruder secured did he turn fully toward her, and the fury in his face gave way, all at once, to something rawer. "You're hurt," he said, reaching for the reddening mark forming on her wrist where she'd wrenched free of the first grab. "I'm fine, Rhys." "You are not fine." His voice cracked on the word, and she had never once heard that from him. Not across a hostile treaty table, not with 6 months of manufactured urgency bearing down on him. "I was 2 floors away. 2 floors, and it nearly wasn't fast enough." "But it was," she said softly, laying her palm flat against his jaw. "You were enough." He turned his face into her hand, eyes closing briefly, and when he opened them again, the gold had receded almost entirely, leaving only the man, exhausted, furious at himself, terrified in a way kings weren't meant to allow themselves to be. He gathered her against his chest, careful of her wrist, and held her there long enough that she felt his heart beat slow, gradually, back toward something steady. It was in the quiet after, walking her out to the waiting car, that he made his mistake. "You're not returning to your apartment tonight," he said. "I'm moving you into secure residence within the royal compound until Vale is dealt with. Iseult will have it arranged within the hour." Wren went very still. "You're moving me." "For your protection." "You didn't ask." The words came out flat, cutting cleanly through the adrenaline still humming in both their veins. 12 hours ago, you told me you'd ask every time it mattered. Now, a bruise on my wrist, and suddenly, my address is a decision you've already made without me. Something shifted across his face, the beginning of a defense forming. "It's for your safety, Wren." She could see it gathering behind his eyes. And then, visibly, he stopped himself. His jaw worked once. "You're right," he said low. "Vale stole 9 years of my choices with a single forged word, and I nearly repaid that by stealing yours out of fear for you." He exhaled slowly. "What do you want, Wren? Tell me, and I'll arrange it instead." "I want the security detail outside my building, like before. I want to be the one who presents this evidence to the council, not you, not on my behalf. And I want you to trust that I know how to protect myself, because tonight I proved that I do." "Done," he said without hesitation. "All of it." Trust, she thought, watching him mean it, wasn't restored by an apology. It would be restored by what he did next. The council chamber held more people than Wren had ever seen crowded into it. Every senior councilman, the full Ashgrave delegation freshly arrived from the north, Iseult's security lining the walls, and at the center of it, Dorian Vale, composed and immaculate, entirely unaware that his own hired intruder had spent the night giving a full recorded confession. Vale rose first. "Your Grace, given last night's security incident, one I understand involved Ms. Calloway directly. I believe the council would agree the Ashgrave alliance should be finalized immediately, as the treaty's terms require." Rhys remained standing, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the chamber without rising at all. "Councilman Vale, before this council votes on anything, I'd like the record to reflect the actual contents of the clause you've cited. Ms. Calloway will present her findings." He did not explain her discovery for her. He simply stepped back and let her stand. Wren laid the 2 documents side by side on the projector, steadied her voice, and spoke to the full chamber. The true original, never digitized, held in the Independent Archive, states that the Ashgrave and Ashmore houses may seal this accord through marriage, an option. The copy Councilman Vale's office has circulated to this council, and to the Ashgrave family changes one word, may to shall, an option rewritten as a legal obligation that has never actually existed. "A convenient theory," Vale said, "from an intoxicated interpreter whose relationship with the king rather obviously colors her conclusions." "I was sober within a day of that photograph," Wren said before Rhys could open his mouth. "And I've spent every day since cross-referencing archive access logs, which show your office replaced this document 8 months ago." She nodded to Iseult, who set the confession recording and a stack of records on the table. "Payment records tying your office to the photographer outside my building, a draft letter from your staff to the Ashgrave family describing this marriage as legally mandatory, which it never was, and a recorded confession from the man your office sent to silence me last night." The chamber went very quiet. Preposterous accusations from a woman who seduced her way into a king's confidence. Vale tried again, color draining from his face even as he reached for one final thread. "You'd have this council believe—" "I'd have this council believe what the evidence already shows," Wren said, calm and unshaken. "That's all I've ever presented. The rest is yours to explain." Lyric Ashgrave rose then, and there was something almost relieved in her voice. "Your Grace, My family was told this marriage was legally required. We were never given the choice your true treaty actually offers. I've had no more desire for a forced match than you have, and I'm glad to see this resolved honestly, whatever shape that resolution takes." Vale looked around the chamber for support. He found none. One by one, the councilmen who had repeated his interpretation lowered their eyes or moved their chairs subtly away from him. Even the members who had favored the Ashgrave alliance now watched him, as though seeing a stranger seated among them. "Recordings can be manufactured," Vale said, but the smooth certainty had vanished from his voice. "Financial records can be misinterpreted. Surely this council will not destroy a lifetime of service over the claims of one frightened criminal and one compromised human woman." Isolde placed a small recording device at the center of the table and pressed play. The captured voice of the archive intruder filled the chamber. Councilman Vale's name, the payment amount, the photographer outside Wren's building, the order to retrieve the original treaty and prevent Wren from testifying before the council. Each detail matched the records already spread across the table. When the recording ended, silence held the chamber. Vale's hand tightened around the back of his chair. "Your Grace, I can explain." "No," Rhys said. He had not raised his voice, but every Lycan in the chamber went still. "The woman you called insignificant uncovered in one night what your office spent 8 months concealing. She found the word you altered, preserved the evidence you tried to destroy, survived the man you sent after her, and still walked into this chamber to present the truth herself." Gold burned through his gray eyes. "You will not diminish her again, simply because you have finally run out of lies." Formal charges were read into the council record. Vale's title and authority were suspended immediately, and Isolde's guards closed around him. For the first time since Wren had met him, Dorian Vale had nothing prepared to say. As he was escorted from the chamber, Rhys crossed the floor toward Wren. He did not step in front of her, or place himself between her and the watching council. He stood beside her. That, more than the apology outside the archive, told her he had understood. They found privacy afterward on the same rooftop where he'd first asked whether she meant the text. The city spread gold beneath them, the noise of the council chamber finally behind them. "I need to tell you something," Rhys said, "away from every councilman in that building." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw something entirely unguarded in his expression. Not the king, not the wolf, just the man underneath both. "You offered me 7 days because you believed that was the largest thing a woman could reasonably ask of a king. I came to your door in 15 minutes because I had already spent 6 months wanting every ordinary day that might come after them." Her throat tightened. "Rhys, I don't want your week," he said. "I want the mornings where nothing is burning down, and no council is watching, and you simply decide, again, that this is where you want to be. That's worth more to me than anything Vale nearly stole, and considerably more than 7 reckless days. That," she said, voice unsteady, "might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me in a council building. I'll work on the setting." His hand rose to cradle her jaw, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I'm not asking you to disappear into a crown you never wanted, Wren. I like the woman who corrects my Latin and tells me when I'm wrong far too much to bury her under a title. I'm asking whether you'll let me keep asking, properly, for as long as it takes, starting now and tomorrow, and every day after that you're willing to give me." "You could just tell me you want me," she said softly. "You don't have to keep phrasing it like a treaty negotiation." Old habits, the ghost of a smile. "Wren Calloway, I want you. Not for a week, for every day you're willing to give me, freely, and I have no interest in anything less." "Then start," she said, "by kissing me properly, since apparently that's something you have to be told to do." He didn't need telling twice, and this kiss held none of the careful restraint of the first. Deeper, surer, both of them finally free of council chambers and forged clauses and everything that had stood between the message and this moment. When he set his forehead against hers again, both of them breathing unevenly, he murmured, "The court will want an acknowledgement. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Whenever you decide you want," it said aloud. "A chosen bond," she said, "not a crown." "Exactly that. Your career stays yours. Your name stays yours. I'm not interested in owning what I've spent 6 months learning to earn." His thumb traced her cheekbone once more. "Whenever you're ready." "Ask me again," she said, smiling now, "when I've had time to get used to the idea of being important enough to a king that his council has opinions about it." "I intend to keep asking," he said, "for exactly as long as that takes." 3 nights later, her apartment lit gold by early evening light, Wren picked up her phone, the same one, screen still faintly cracked from the chaos of the week, and typed a message to a contact she'd long since renamed from its old joke alias. The first message was an accident. This one isn't. "Come ask me how long I want you now." She hit send and did not delete it. His response came almost immediately. 3 dots, then nothing, then the specific sound of her building's front door releasing downstairs. He was at her door in under 4 minutes. "You're getting faster," she said, opening it to find him already reaching for her. "I was already at the compound 3 streets over," he admitted, reviewing Vale's tribunal paperwork. "I may have left it mid-sentence." "So you didn't even have to run this time?" "I ran anyway." He backed her gently against the doorframe, voice gone low and rough, gold flickering warm through the gray. "The first time, you offered me 1 week. This time, little mate, I want every day you choose to make mine, and I intend to make you glad you chose me." "That's a lot of days to commit to over 1 text message." "The message only gave me permission," he murmured against her mouth, "to stop pretending I hadn't wanted you for months." She pulled him inside, and this time the door closed behind them and stayed that way, quiet and certain, for a very long time. If you had to choose the moment you fell for him, the 15 minutes at her door, the jealousy on the rooftop, or the vow after the council, which one would it be? Tell me in the comments.